Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be putting together a custom Atomic Purple Super Nintendo. Now if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you know I'm a huge fan of Atomic Purple, and one of my favorite consoles is the Super Nintendo. I grew up with this thing. And of course, on the channel, we do a lot of emulation, but original hardware is really hard to beat. And I've got a pretty substantial Super Nintendo collection, and I do want to mention this again. No Super Nintendos were harmed in the making of this video. Actually, quite the opposite is happening here. We're actually going to give this one new life. I picked this up on eBay for $30, and it is a little beat up. It's actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Somebody has definitely been inside of here before, but it is working. All the parts are here. As you can see, the top plate there is missing, and the cart door is a little off kilter, but the spring's still there. But the main thing I needed was an extra functioning system, and that's what we have here, so we can put it inside of the new Retro Game Restore shell. I think this thing is absolutely beautiful, and you know, if it was up to me, all of my devices would be this transparent Atomic Purple. I've always been a huge fan of it, and getting something for a Super Nintendo like this is actually really awesome. Now in the past on the channel, we actually took a look at their clear shell. It was just a transparent clear shell, and in that video I did mention it would be nice to have Atomic Purple, so they finally came through. And they also offer Genesis and Mega Drive shells. You can go with the Super Famicom shell if you want to, and they've even got a TurboGrafx 16 shell in smoked and transparent clear. But today we're going to be using their Atomic Purple North American Super Nintendo shell. And this thing is actually built very well. I mean, it's 2 spec of the original shell, so we shouldn't have any fitment issues here. But the first thing we need to do is get this old one apart. And like I mentioned, this top section is missing, plus we've got an issue with the cart door, but we don't actually need that top section with these shells. Getting these things apart is actually pretty simple as long as you have the correct tools. This is a 4.5mm security bit screwdriver. And we've got some on the bottom here that we need to remove. And keep in mind, they do send some Phillips head replacement screws for these, so you don't need to reuse them, but personally I think I'm going to, as long as they're not stripped out. And so far, everything's coming apart pretty easily. Alright, so now that I have the shell screws removed, we can just take this top right off. And we will need to reuse the parts in the top half of this. That cart door doesn't look like it's broken. I just think that spring might have kind of flipped over on itself. And from this, we will need to reuse the power and reset button, along with the ejection mechanism. And I gotta say, this one's actually pretty clean on the interior. Sometimes you'll see these with the metal shields kind of corroded, if they were in a real harsh environment. But this is pretty clean, no corrosion, and the ejection mechanism is working here. We've got that spring. And everything's looking pretty good so far, but now we need to get this main board out of here. So we've got a few screws that we need to remove here, and there is one under this power button. So go ahead and take that off first, and then you'll see it underneath there. But not too bad, especially when you've got one of these electric screwdrivers. And I will tell you from experience, the ones in the rear near the power input and the audio video out are really tight. You'll need a longer screwdriver to get there. Just make sure you don't strip them out. We'll go ahead and get this ejection mechanism out. It just uses a rod along with a little spring. And the case is kind of designed to hold that spring. Make sure you don't lose that. Now that we have all of the screws out, we can go ahead and remove the main board. And I just leave the controller ports attached to the main board. Just makes it really easy to kind of set it back down in the new shell. And like I mentioned, everything should line up. It looks like this is kind of just a direct replacement. I don't think we need to do any kind of fabrication or anything like that. We've even got the lineup nubs for the power switch, so everything should kind of just sit right down in here very nicely. So we'll just go ahead and line everything up. Got our controller ports to slide right in. You don't want to put too much force on that cable, but I mean, these things were built really well. Yeah. There we go. Looking great. Now it's time to put some screws in it to hold this main board down. And once those are in place, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the cart ejection mechanism. We've got that little spring. It's going to line right up, and we'll slide this bar right in there. You just want to make sure you got some spring back once it's put in here. And I mean, as long as you've got it springing back, then it's in there correctly. When it comes to the original top half of the shell, we got 4 screws we need to get out here so we can get to those power and reset sliders. And keep in mind, when disassembling the top, there is a small spring for the reset button, so it'll spring back into action. Make sure you don't lose it. And everything just fell apart on me, but there's that little spring there for the reset button. Now we do need to get these sliders out. They've got a couple little clips. Just going to kind of pinch them, push them out. We'll get that reset and power ready to go in the new top half of the shell. These white sections here are different from each other. Make sure you put them on the correct side, but you know, they should only line up one way. We've got the power side here. It's got that little hole to line up with the power switch in the bottom half of the shell. And for the reset, this should be loose once it's snapped into place. That way that spring can get it right back to where it was. And we will have to reinstall that spring, but we're going to go ahead and put this in. Snap the back half on. And we're actually almost done here. So yeah, just as I thought, that spring on the cart door was just kind of flipped over. We need to make sure it's in the correct orientation so we have some spring back from the door itself. And getting this in here can be a bit cumbersome, but you know, if you kind of fold it down and if you can reach your finger in there or some kind of object to kind of hold that cart door in place, you can just kind of put it right back on top. Once we let that go, it'll spring up. It's going to be stopped by the top half of the shell. And yeah, this is actually looking really nice. I've got the 4 screws installed to hold this to the top half of the shell. Now we need that spring for the reset button. Just make sure it's kind of springing back. And really, that's about it. All we need to do now is throw the top half of the shell on. And we do need to line the power switch up with the white plastic piece on the power slider. That way, you know, it kind of holds it and it'll make contact with it. And when it comes to the reset button, it's kind of a spring-loaded momentary switch right here on the board. So there's not much we need to do there. It should just kind of line itself up. And with this on, I'm just going to put the screws in the bottom, and I'm going to use the stock screws, that 4.5mm security bit, but it does come with extras if you want to use those instead. Right on the bottom here, we've got our communication port. And yeah, there we go. And yeah, I think this thing looks so good. If you're a fan of Atomic Purple, you can appreciate something like this. They've done a great job matching that color, and just having a transparent shell on an SNES I think looks really good, especially in this color option. Now it's time to see if it works. I mean, it definitely worked before we put the shell on it. I don't see any reason it wouldn't, but let's go ahead and test it out. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw Super Street Fighter 2 in. I'm using an original SNES controller, and it would be nice to have an Atomic Purple controller, but you would get a ton of fingerprints on it. This is just an older controller I've had for a long time, and it still works great. But yeah, overall, think it looks great. Very happy with the shell from Retro Game Restore, and if you're interested in, you know, learning more, maybe picking one of these up, or for a different console, I'll leave some links in the description. And I'd also like to know your thoughts in the comments below. I mean, what do you think about this Atomic Purple shell on the SNES? I think it looks great, but you know, if it was up to you, would you go with the regular, transparent clear, the smoked clear, or Atomic Purple? Obviously, this is what I would have went with, but that's just me. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.